You know what's fascinating? When a government manages to unite an entire country against them, but in the most specific way possible. We're not talking about healthcare or education or even the economy. No, labor has somehow managed to alienate virtually everyone who lives outside a major city, and they've done it in record time. Two-thirds of Britons now say Keir Starmer's government doesn't give a damn about rural communities, and three-quarters reckon Labour only cares about urban issues. That's not just bad polling, that's catastrophic. Welcome back to UK Political Insight, where we break down the political chaos so you don't have to wade through it yourself. Today we're diving into how Labour has managed to start what can only be described as a war on the countryside, complete with tax grabs, hunting bans, and enough angry farmers to fill Trafalgar Square several times over. Let's get into it. Right, so the Countryside Alliance commissioned a poll of 2,000 voters, and the results are absolutely damning for this government. Not only do two-thirds think Labour neglects rural people, but when asked what the government's priorities should be, not a single person said banning trail hunting should be at the top of the list. Not one out of 2,000 people. That's statistically impressive in its own way. You've essentially found the one policy that literally nobody thinks is urgent, and you've decided to make it a flagship initiative. It's like going to a restaurant, ignoring the entire menu, and demanding they serve you something that isn't even food. Bold strategy, Labour. Let's see how that works out. Tim Bonner, the chief executive of the Countryside Alliance, didn't mince words. He said Starmer has alienated rural people during his first 18 months in power, which is remarkable because he's only actually been prime minister for about 6 months. That means he was managing to annoy the countryside even before he got into number 10, which takes real commitment. Bonner pointed out that Labour's priorities are completely warped, focusing on taxing family farms, raising business rates for rural businesses, and banning trail hunting instead of doing anything that would actually help people who live in the countryside. It's like they've got a checklist titled How to Make Rural Britain Hate Us, and they're methodically working through it. Now let's talk about this trail hunting ban, because the timing is absolutely perfect in the worst possible way. The poll results were published hours before hundreds of thousands of people turned out for what might be the last ever Boxing Day hunts. Boxing Day hunts are a massive tradition in rural Britain. Whether you personally agree with them or not, they're a huge part of countryside culture. They bring communities together, and they're already operating under the rules established after the original hunting ban in 2005. Trail hunting, for those not familiar, involves following a scent trail rather than actually hunting live animals. It's meant to be the compromise solution, but Labour's decided that even this isn't acceptable and they want to ban it entirely. Here's the thing though. When you've got a country dealing with NHS waiting lists, a cost of living crisis, crumbling infrastructure, and a housing shortage that's basically a national emergency, deciding that your big priority is banning a countryside activity that nobody in your poll said was important feels like you're actively trying to create division. It's culture war politics at its most transparent. And the people in rural communities can see right through it. They're not stupid. They know this isn't about animal welfare or public safety. It's about urban politicians who fundamentally don't understand or respect their way of life, deciding to impose their values on communities they've never lived in and don't care to understand. Farmer Gareth Wyn-Jones absolutely nailed it when he said there's a real feeling the government just doesn't understand the countryside and that they're deliberately targeting rural communities to create a culture war. Because that's exactly what this looks like. It's not governance, it's grievance politics. And when you're in government, that's a really dangerous game to play because you're meant to represent everyone, not just the urban centers that vote for you in larger numbers. But the trail hunting controversy is actually the smaller part of this story. The real devastation has been caused by Rachel Reeves' family farms tax, and the numbers are absolutely staggering. In the 12 months leading up to October, more than 6,200 farming businesses closed. That's the largest closure of farms since records began. Let me repeat that because it's genuinely shocking. The largest ever closure of farms in recorded history happened in the 12 months after Labour announced their inheritance tax plans for farms. 6,200 family businesses, generations of heritage, centuries of agricultural knowledge, all gone. Now, the government finally did a partial U-turn this week. They announced the inheritance tax threshold would be raised from £1 million to £2.5 million. That's a step in the right direction, and it'll save some farms from being broken up or sold off. But here's the problem. The damage has already been done. You can't unclose 6,000 farms. Those families have already sold up, already walked away, already lost their livelihoods. The uncertainty alone has been enough to destroy confidence in the sector and push people who were on the edge into making irreversible decisions. David Exwood from the National Farmers Union laid it out pretty clearly. Farmers have been dealing with cash flow pressures, extreme weather, global market volatility, the family farm's tax threat, and uncertainty over environmental schemes. That's a perfect storm of challenges, and the inheritance tax panic was the thing that pushed thousands of them over the edge. And remember, these aren't just businesses closing. These are often family farms that have been passed down through multiple generations. We're talking about heritage, culture, and entire ways of life disappearing because of a tax policy that the government has now admitted was flawed. The human cost of this policy has been absolutely tragic, and nowhere is that clearer than in the story of John Philip Charlesworth. He was a 78-year-old farmer from Barnsley who was found dead in a barn on his farm on October 29th last year. An inquest heard that in the months before Rachel Reeves' budget, he'd been growing more and more anxious about inheritance tax and what it would mean for his farm. His son Jonathan told the inquest that he believed his father wanted to beat the government's proposals and save the farm for future generations. Think about that. A man was so worried about losing his family's farm to inheritance tax that he took his life hoping it would somehow protect what his family had built. Jonathan Charlesworth said the government's U-turn this week was the best Christmas present for a lot of farmers, which is both heartwarming and absolutely heartbreaking at the same time. It's a step in the right direction, and it means more farms will sleep easier without the threat of inheritance tax hanging over them. But as Jonathan pointed out, it won't bring back the lives lost over the last year due to the anxiety this policy caused. His father is dead because of the stress and fear created by this government's approach to taxing farmers. That's not hyperbole or political exaggeration. That's what happened. And while the U-turn might prevent more tragedies, it doesn't undo the damage already done to families like the Charlesworth. The broader issue here is that Labour fundamentally doesn't understand rural Britain, and worse, they don't seem particularly interested in learning. Urban politicians look at farmers and see wealthy landowners sitting on valuable assets. They see big numbers on paper and think that means these people are rich and should pay their fair share. What they completely miss is that farms are asset-rich but cash-poor. A farm might be worth millions on paper because land is valuable, but that doesn't mean the family farming it has millions in the bank. The value is all tied up in the land, the equipment, the livestock. You can't pay an inheritance tax bill with a tractor and 300 sheep. When you force families to sell off parts of their farm to pay inheritance tax, you're not just taking money from wealthy people. You're making farms smaller and less viable. You're forcing the consolidation of agriculture into fewer, larger corporate hands. You're destroying the family farm model that's been the backbone of British agriculture for centuries. And for what? The amount of revenue this inheritance tax change was supposed to generate was relatively small in the context of the overall budget. It was never about raising significant funds. It was about the principle, about being seen to tax the wealthy, even if the people being taxed weren't actually wealthy in any meaningful sense. This gets to a deeper problem with how urban-dominated parties view rural issues. There's this assumption that rural concerns are somehow less legitimate or less important than urban ones, that if you live in a city of 5 million people, your problems matter more than if you live in a village of 500. But democracy isn't supposed to work that way. Rural communities are just as much a part of this country as urban ones, and they deserve policies that are designed with their needs and their reality in mind, not policies that treat them as an afterthought, or worse, as a problem to be solved. The polling numbers bear this out. 3/4 of voters say Labour prioritizes urban issues over rural concerns. That's not just rural people complaining. That's 3/4 of everyone, including plenty of urban voters who can see what's happening. People recognize unfairness even when it doesn't directly affect them. And when you've got that level of agreement across the population, it suggests the problem isn't perception, it's reality. Labor really is neglecting rural Britain, and it's obvious enough that most people can see it. What makes this even more politically baffling is that Labour doesn't need to be doing this. They won a massive majority. They've got 5 years before they face the voters again. They could be using this time to build bridges, to show they're a government for the whole country, to prove that they understand and value all communities, not just the urban centers that tend to vote for them anyway. Instead, they've chosen confrontation. They've picked fights with farmers, with countryside communities, with traditions and ways of life that have existed for centuries. And for what? To please a relatively small group of activists who live in cities and have strong opinions about things they don't actually understand. The irony is that food security should be a massive priority for any government, especially in an era of climate change and global instability. We saw during COVID and the Ukraine war how vulnerable supply chains can be. Having a strong domestic farming